ABC General Hospital spoilers reveal that Willow had always imagined that stepping into Drew's place would feel like stepping into the sun, but when the Senate chamber doors closed behind her for the first time, the light seemed to twist, bending into something colder, sharper, more dangerous. The power she inherited did not greet her. It consumed her. Every file marked classified, every whispered briefing in dimly lit corridors. Every nod of acknowledgement from people who once overlooked her. All of it carved deeper into her mind a realization. She could no longer escape. She was no longer just a citizen of Port Charles. She was becoming an architect of its future, and perhaps without knowing it, a threat to everything she had once tried to protect. Her early decisions were cautious, even timid, as if she feared the walls might collapse if she touched anything too boldly. But the moment she signed her first order authorizing new levels of federal oversight, something shifted inside her. It was like a pulse awakening beneath her skin, a dark hum of possibility that whispered she could reshape the world if she pushed just a little harder. The praise came quickly, too quickly. Advisors lauded her efficiency, political allies praised her clarity, and even her skeptics marveled at her resolve. Willow absorbed it all, each compliment a thread tightening around her conscience until morality felt more like a suggestion than a boundary. Soon she found herself drafting policy after policy, each one granting her office broader authority, deeper access, greater reach. At first she told herself it was necessary. Stability required strength. Safety required vigilance. But behind closed doors, the motivations evolved. She began to enjoy the silence that followed her orders. The way entire departments adjusted their operations with a single signature from her hand. Control was no longer a responsibility, it was a craving she had never known she possessed. Whispers began circulating around Port Charles, faint suspicions that the new senator was not the gentle, compassionate woman the public believed. Willow's reforms were too sweeping. The surveillance programs too intrusive. The new emergency protocols too vague. Yet every challenge against her only hardened her stance. She dismissed criticism as ignorance, framed opposition as danger, and convinced herself that only she could foresee the threats lurking beneath the surface of society. Her vision of protection slowly morphed into domination, though she refused to call it that. The turning point came when Willow introduced a sweeping national security bill, one crafted so meticulously and hidden beneath so many layers of legislative language that even experienced senators struggled to decipher it. Buried within its clauses were new structures of governmental power that bypassed judicial oversight and expanded the discrete authority of her office to unprecedented levels. She justified it all with a calm, icy certainty, arguing that the country was entering an era where old systems could no longer defend it. But beneath her words lived a darker truth. Willow no longer trusted anyone but herself. Friends tried to reach her, Michael with his quiet concerns, Carly with her fierce warnings, even Nina with trembling attempts at connection, but Willow responded with distance, suspicion, even disdain. She began to sever emotional ties as if they were liabilities. Vulnerability felt like weakness, and weakness was something she had sworn to leave behind. The more isolated she became, the more powerful she felt. And the more powerful she felt, the more the shadows within her grew. Late at night, when the capital was silent, Willow would sit alone in her office, staring at the city skyline as if she alone bore the burden of shaping its fate. The glow from her desk lamp cast long, fractured shadows across the room, shadows that seemed to move when she wasn't looking. Her reflection in the window appeared almost unfamiliar, her eyes harder, her posture straighter, her expression somewhere between determination and obsession. She wondered when the shift had begun. Was it the moment she said yes to Sidwell's proposal? The moment she discovered she could command entire teams with a single phone call? Or had the darkness been waiting inside her all along, patient and quiet until power gave it permission to rise? The darkest revelation came when Willow approved an operation that would allow her office to monitor communications across Port Charles under the guise of investigating unrest and potential subversion. It was a turning point no one expected from her, not even those who had supported her climb. Families began to feel watched. Journalists reported coded warnings. Civil rights groups demanded answers but found themselves blocked by legal language too complex to untangle. Willow dismissed all of it with a chilling, practiced ease, insisting that safety demanded sacrifice. Those who questioned her motives were labeled naive, misinformed, or in extreme cases suspect. But the true disaster was yet to come. Hidden inside her latest bill was a clause granting her unilateral power to override state-level decisions in the Principe, event of undefined national instability. Only Willow could determine what counted as instability. Only she could trigger the protocol. And once activated, it would grant her near-dictatorial authority for an indefinite period of time. She told herself she would never use it. She told herself it was merely precautionary. But even as she signed the final draft, there was a small electrifying thrill humming through her. A hunger she could neither ignore nor fully understand. Port Charles began to fracture. Businesses feared government intrusion. Families whispered about disappearing privacy. Lawmakers exchanged anxious glances whenever Willow's name appeared on the docket. They all sensed something building, something heavy and unspoken, like a storm gathering behind the quiet hum of daily life. And Willow felt it too. She felt the shift, the tightening tension, the sense that she was standing at the edge of something vast and irreversible. Yet instead of stepping back, she leaned in. Because the truth she no longer admitted even to herself was this: the darkness didn't scare her anymore. It empowered her. It shaped her. It gave her the strength she once begged the world to grant her. What she didn't realize, what she couldn't realize, was that the same darkness now curling around her decisions was preparing to swallow everything she touched. The rise of Senator Willow wasn't the triumph she had imagined. It was the opening chapter of a catastrophe that Port Charles had never faced before, and one she might not be able to stop once it fully awakened. Willow's rise to power had already created ripples across Port Charles. But no one expected those ripples to turn into waves strong enough to drag Michael into a storm he never saw coming. The moment Willow stepped into Drew's place, the dynamic between her and Michael shifted quietly at first. Then sharply, then dangerously. She no longer approached him as a partner or even as an equal. She approached him as someone who held the authority to shape destinies, and she began to wield that authority with an unsettling precision. Michael tried to be supportive. He told himself Willow only needed time to adjust to the demands of Washington, that the intensity in her eyes was just stress, that the clipped tone she used in private briefings was simply a byproduct of pressure. But slowly, unmistakably, the distance between them widened. Willow began speaking to him in statements rather than discussions, delivering decisions instead of invitations for input. And the worst part was that these decisions weren't about policy anymore, they were about family. They were about control. Willow had seen the vulnerability in their family structure, the fragile threads connecting Michael to Wiley and Amelia, and she started to view those threads not as bonds, but as leverage. Her new position gave her access to legal advisors, political strategists, and federal influence that could be redirected in ways few people understood. With each new legislative adjustment she endorsed, the space for Michael to exert any authority over his own children seemed to shrink. The boundary between Senate power and personal life blurred until even Willow no longer recognized when she crossed it. Michael noticed the shift the first time Willow mentioned policy implications while discussing Wiley's school enrollment. He noticed again when she referred to Amelia's guardianship in terms of stability metrics. At first he was stunned, then frightened, then angry. Willow was no longer thinking like a mother, she was thinking like a government. She was using her new authority as a framework to reshape her household. And Michael realized too late that he no longer understood the woman sitting across from him at the dinner table. One of the most shocking moments came when Willow hinted that certain behavioral expectations needed to be met if Michael wanted continued access to certain parental decisions. The wording was vague, but the intention was unmistakable. Willow was positioning herself as the ultimate decision-maker not because she doubted Michael's capabilities, but because she believed absolute power required absolute alignment. And she was willing to enforce that alignment even within the walls of her own home. Michael felt the ground shifting beneath him. His authority, once unquestioned, once built on trust and love, was now being undermined by a growing political shadow. Willow's policies, though publicly framed as national security initiatives, were quietly affecting family law structures, parental rights frameworks, and procedural guidelines that could strip him of influence if interpreted a certain way. Willow insisted she was simply strengthening the system. Michael realized she was strengthening herself. The true terror came when Michael understood that Wiley and Amelia were becoming pieces in a political chess game he didn't know he was playing. Willow's adjustments to federal oversight meant she could argue for optimal environments for children definitions. She could mold with her new power. And while Willow had not yet made any formal moves, the possibility loomed like a blade suspended by a single thread. One wrong step, one disagreement, one refusal to fall in line, and Michael could lose more than an argument. He could lose his children. This was the future Willow was unknowingly constructing, a future where Wiley and Amelia's stability depended not on love or family but on political alignment and personal obedience. And whether Willow understood the damage she was capable of inflicting no longer mattered. The machinery she had set in motion was powerful, relentless, and dangerously easy for her to justify. Michael stood at the edge of a collapse he could feel but not yet see. Willow stood above it, convinced she was building a safer world. What neither realized was that power once unleashed does not distinguish between protecting a family and destroying. And the shock awaiting them would not simply alter their relationship. It had the potential to redefine the fate of Wiley and Amelia in ways no one in Port Charles was prepared to face. The deeper Willow descended into the world of political power, the more she failed to realize she was no longer navigating it on her own terms. What began as a role she accepted out of duty gradually morphed into a system tightening around her like invisible chains. Sidwell, quiet, calculating. and always 3 steps ahead, watched her transformation with the precision of someone grooming a weapon rather than supporting a colleague. And without noticing the shift, Willow became exactly what he intended, not a senator with independence, but an instrument of his larger, darker agenda. Her reforms, once driven by fear and ambition, slowly began aligning too perfectly with Sidwell's interests. He fed her selective information, whispered warnings about invisible threats, hinted at enemies hiding behind familiar faces. He flattered her intelligence, praised her resolve, and positioned himself as the only voice who truly understood the burden she carried. Willow, already slipping into isolation and drowning in responsibility, mistook his manipulation for mentorship. And because his guidance always came wrapped in urgency, she adopted his directives with a level of obedience she didn't even question. Control became the new language of her work, a language Sidwell taught her fluently. Every policy she enacted under his influence expanded surveillance, reduced personal freedoms, and shifted authority away from public institutions and into her hands he already controlled. Each signature she placed on a document was another step into his shadow, another tether binding her to a man whose intentions no longer resembled governance but domination. What Willow didn't see was the emerging pattern. Sidwell had no desire to lead publicly. He wanted someone else to execute the decisions he designed, someone respected, someone sympathetic, someone who appeared morally driven even when carrying out morally questionable actions. Willow was perfect. She had the image, the credibility, the emotional history that made her transformation believable. No one would suspect her until it was too late. The darkest part was how easily Sidwell exploited her personal fears. He amplified her anxieties about national threats, pushed her paranoia about losing control, and kept her emotionally destabilized enough to rely on him. Under that pressure, Willow began approving protocols she didn't fully understand and endorsing initiatives she didn't fully agree with. Sidwell would present the framework, Willow would defend it, and the public would accept it because Willow had once been the gentle, principled woman they trusted. This was the new disaster, forming quietly beneath Port Charles, a senator unknowingly acting as the mouthpiece of a man with unchecked ambition, a woman whose growing power was no longer her own but a mirror reflecting Sidwell's will. And the system she was helping him build piece by piece, law by law, was no longer just restrictive. It was oppressive. It was dangerous. It was irreversible. The tragedy was not simply that Willow was being controlled. It was that she believed the decisions she made were her own. She believed she was protecting her future, protecting Michael, protecting Wiley and Amelia. But in truth, the more she tightened her grip, the more she played directly into Sidwell's plan to destabilize the very fabric of governance. The emerging catastrophe wasn't a single event, it was a progression. A slow poisoning of political ethics. A dismantling of civil protections. A leader reshaped into a puppet while believing she had become a mastermind. And when the world finally recognized what was happening, it would not be Sidwell standing in the spotlight. It would be Willow, the perfect scapegoat, the perfect shield, the perfect tragedy. A woman transformed by power into the very force that would break everything she once held dear.